I can still remember the first time that I ever saw Cowboy Bebop. It was 2001. I had fallen asleep on the couch while Cartoon Network was on TV, and I woke up late into the night, and this show I'd never seen before was playing. It was very dark, and the character designs had this very adult, different feel from what I'd seen before. And what I saw was a woman who had just shot her boyfriend right before flying into a bunch of police spacecraft which blew her to pieces. And I didn't really understand what was happening at the time. I wasn't following the plot of the episode. It just seemed incredibly sad. And I'd never seen anything so violent or tragic before. I'd never really seen something that would resolve in such a sad way. And I just remember being kind of confused and taken aback and not knowing what to think of the situation. Now, a few weeks later, I would find out about Cartoon Network's new Adult Swim block, and eventually I would become a big fan of Cowboy Bebop because a lot of the episodes of the show were action-packed and funny and fun to watch, and the show really covered a broad range of emotions. It seemed like it was trying to capture every different facet of what life was like, every different emotion that you might feel while living your life, and it was presented in this very adult way that I didn't completely understand at the time. For me, it was mostly about the cool, fun stuff. And I know that over the years, I would see that episode again and again, and the part that I never quite got when I was younger was why so much of the beginning and end of the episode is dedicated to Jet just making these bell peppers and beef without any beef, and him and Spike just kind of going through their routine on the spaceship. Now, as an adult, going back to that episode, what surprised me the most was that the main story of the episode, the story of the woman and the bounty, is not very interesting. And I don't think it's supposed to be. It's a very typical sob story. It's just the kind of thing you'd expect. And it feels weird to think of that as the first episode of Cowboy Bebop, a show that's so inventive and so fun and covers so many different feelings and moods. But now that I can look at it with the perspective I have as a grown man who has seen so many of these stories, these short sob stories, what really resonates with me is that opening and ending scene. The part where it's just Spike and Jet eating and working out. Because those are the scenes that best convey what Cowboy Bebop is about. You see, this world is full of sob stories. This world is full of things that, if you thought about them too much, would ruin you. It's full of people whose lives go wrong through reasons that are out of their control sometimes, or being in the wrong circumstances, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The story of this episode is just any other tragedy. When you're young, you might not understand that as well, but when you're older and you've seen so much of this, then you kind of become numb to it. And really, the only way to deal with this kind of thing emotionally is to just go about your life as you would normally. It's so hard to try and feel something every single time you learn of a tragedy, because if you do, you'll never stop being depressed. For me personally, the hardest thing about facing the world is realizing how much hardship there is. And the only way I can figure out how to live my life in a world that's so terrible is to try and forget about it, to try and put it out of mind and just live my own life as best I can and deal with my own circumstances and worry about myself. And I think that in Cowboy Bebop, we see Spike and Jet doing exactly that. They're trying to just use their routine to forget about everything, to say life goes on. Because in the long run, the fact that Jet and Spike are poor is a much more pressing matter than the tragic death of this woman. Because even though their stories have intersected with hers, they've seen so much of this. They can't afford to be affected by it. They can't afford to sit around all day and cry over this woman who they barely knew when on a day-to-day level, their life is really about trying to get some damn beef in that bell peppers and beef. And I think that generally sets the tone for what this show is. It's a bunch of bounty hunters who are adults, who are grappling with their own lives, who are barely making it, barely scraping by, coming into contact with all these different stories and just trying to maintain themselves and maintain their sanity. And there's a brilliant sort of reversal on that scene from the first episode in episode 24 when Ed and Faye finally leave the Bebop, and we get this scene of Spike and Jet trying their best to forget about them, to just eat all these eggs and try to put it all out of mind like they've done so many times before, to just live their lives and move on and pretend this never happened. But there's this sense in that scene like it's desperate. It's not quite working because they have become attached. They have become attached to Faye and Ed, and they're really trying their hardest to move past it, to just do whatever they can to put it out of mind. And it's a struggle. They can't just flippantly go back to eating. That's why they're cramming the eggs down their throat with such manic desperation while fucking Call Me plays. And this scene will ruin you the more you think about it. It is unbelievably poignant. Cowboy Bebop is a show that doesn't like to dwell too much on things. It's always about moving forward and trying to fake your way through accepting the past. Spike says in episode 25 that because he has one real eye and one false eye, one of them can only see the past and one can only see the present. But as viewers, we rarely see Spike's past. We only get small glimpses into it. We see montages without words. We learn little tidbits of information, but we never really get a full sense of Spike's past. We learn what Jet was like back in the day. We meet some of the people that turned him into who he is. And yet, we never see the whole story with any of these characters. Their past is something that haunts them, but they're all trying to work past it. And Cowboy Bebop seems so ready to block out the details, to ride on feeling, to make you feel what Spike's past was like without really knowing it. In that scene from the first episode, when the woman goes off to die, we see such brief glimpses of how the situation resolves, and really, even learning about her situation is mostly done in just a few sparse lines of dialogue, because that's really all we need to get a sense of what this story is and what it means. Cowboy Bebop lives on implications. It lives on suggesting things to the audience, letting us draw our meaning out of it, and then letting us try to deal with what we've discovered. And the ending of the series is incredibly tragic. It's about Spike trying to finally resolve his past and essentially becoming trapped by it. He didn't have to go back and face the things that he did, but of course he did. And as you probably know, because it's one of the most commonly stated spoilers of all time, Spike does die at the end of the series. And the last message of the show, you're gonna carry that weight. It's like it's saying that Spike and Jet, back in episode 1, tried so hard not to carry that weight. They tried to put it past them. And in episode 24, when they ate all those eggs, they tried to pretend that they didn't feel the weight of what they'd been through. But you as a viewer, now that you've reached the end of this journey, now that you've been so far with these characters, you have to carry that weight. You have to decide if you can put this all past you or not. And the show knows you can't. Because the truth is, you really can't ever. You can't ever put it all behind you. It always down on you. Spike could never escape his past. None of the characters really could. You try so hard to move on and pretend like none of it affects you so that you can make it through, but in the end, the way you act is always informed by what's shaped you and what's brought you here. It's a weight you have to carry, whether you want to or not, whether you like it or not. And I think that's what makes Cowboy Bebop so poignant, what makes it feel so adult and so genuine, what makes it stick with people for so long after watching it. Because it's not about the story. Cowboy Bebop isn't about this strong narrative full of these strong themes. It's about feelings. It's a show that instills these feelings in you through suggestion, through making you realize for yourself what's going on and how you feel about the events that have transpired, and then carrying those feelings inside of you and trying to come to terms with them by yourself without the show telling you how. It never really gives you guidance on how you're supposed to feel. It just forces you to do so. I think it's because the show draws from such a broad palette of emotions that it's able to resonate with so many people. When I was a kid, there were characters that stuck with me so strongly, scenes that stuck with me so much. And now that I'm an adult, there's a whole different set of scenes, a whole different set of emotions that stick with me. I haven't even watched Cowboy Bebop in years. I just remember so much of it so well. It's so ingrained into my memory, those feelings and that atmosphere, that I don't think I could ever forget it. And I don't think I've ever seen another work of art that had that kind of power over me, that kind of way of making me feel so strongly about the events that I haven't been able to put them behind me in all these years. I've never been able to forget. I'm always haunted by the past of having seen Cowboy Bebop, but in a very pleasant way. And I think it's helpful because I can't simply ignore or put these feelings I have about the world, these difficulties that I have in dealing with the world behind me. I can't turn a blind eye to all of the suffering and hardship that I see in the world. You know, as hard as I try, eventually I do have to face it. And I think that I will always be carrying that weight for as long as I live, as much as I don't want to.